Well, hey, everybody. Mike Griffith here, and welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat program and some Georgia football and some Alabama football to talk about. Obviously, the Crimson Tide making a lot of headlines and a lot of news with Nick Saban's retirement last Wednesday. I guess it's been 5 days now. The sun keeps coming up in Tuscaloosa, and Kalen DeBoer, the new head coach from Washington, some debate over whether he was the first choice, the second choice, the third choice. Interesting hire by Alabama. I think probably on paper the best hire, and I don't know that really there would have been a safer hire, but yet this is somewhat risky because this is a guy who doesn't have any ties to the Southeastern Conference. I almost feel like Alabama needed to be aggressive with this hire and take a chance, as opposed to a guy who really hasn't coached that much in the FBS ranks. He's been at Washington 2 years, both years with Michael Penix and some NFL receivers, 25-3 with the Huskies. Pretty impressive team last year. At Fresno State, only 12-6, though. I'm not sure how you feel about that. Should a great coach go 12-6? In fact, just a few years ago, he's coaching at Fresno State in Bryant-Denny Stadium, and he loses 41-10. Can Kalen DeBoer have been that great of a coach that he was somewhat anonymous at that point, but 3 years and 2 years with Michael Penix later, he's the guy that's tasked with replacing Nick Saban. I think that's interesting. I wrote a column for DawgNation.com saying that I thought Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, probably should have talked to two other coaches. Mike Loxley's one of them. And people say, what do you mean, the Maryland coach? Look at his record. Look at what he did at New Mexico. And I say, well, you know what? This is a coach who is pretty aggressive, who's pretty fiery. I oversaw the 2018 Alabama offense that set records with Tua during the regular season. I mean, that was an unbeatable team until Tua got hurt against Georgia in the SEC title game. I thought he deserved an interview as well, and certainly you want to be diverse in the candidates you consider. So that kind of bothered me a little bit that he didn't even get an interview. And I said Dabo Swinney too, and I know Dabo was a very polarizing figure. But with Dabo, you have a two-time national champion that beat Nick Saban twice. Now, you might say he's a few years removed from that, and I would suggest that's because he's at Clemson, that doesn't have the facilities, that doesn't have the NIL money, that can't keep up through the NIL channels. Dabo tried to do it internally a little bit more to the extreme than Kirby, and it didn't fare well for Clemson. But I feel like if you at least interview Dabo, if you at least show him that respect, then you kind of satisfy the old guard. And Alabama people, Georgia fans are saying, well, why do we care about all this? Well, because this is the program you've got to get by. And turmoil and challenges for Alabama indirectly benefits Georgia. Great example of that was the big win that Kirby Smart scored today, getting Travaris Robinson, the Alabama secondary coach. And T-Rob is a guy that the recruits know, and he's a recruit that the players know. And you want to know why? Take a look at the draft board. You're going to see two cornerbacks that are projected first-round picks that Travaris Robinson developed and coached. And that's what players want. They want a coach that can get them to the next level, that can teach them and coach them up to become first-round picks. You might say, well, Mike, that's just two Bama guys. Okay, let's turn back the clock to 2019, the last time Georgia lost a home game. Do you know who the defensive coordinator was under Will Muschamp in 2019? Travaris Robinson. Remember those three Jake Fromm interceptions? Did you know Jake hadn't thrown an interception in the first 5 games? I believe there was a first or second round cornerback on that team too. Look, this is a guy that can develop talent, and just 42 years old brings a lot of energy. You may wonder, well, what about Will Muschamp? Will Muschamp is a fantastic coach. I think Will Muschamp was absolutely pivotal to the 2021 team, the way he was able to step into that full-time role. He didn't sign up for that when he first came. He was going to be an analyst, remember? But then Will got into that role. I thought he did a tremendous job. Everybody I've talked to said Will Muschamp just brought a ray of sunshine into that building. Players loved him. Remember how Lewis Seen carried on about Coach Muschamp and how important he was en route to him becoming a first-round pick? Well, Coach Muschamp has another son. headed for Nashville. And there's a lot of talk that Coach Muschamp wants to spend some time with his family. So he's not going to be as involved. He's at a point in his life where he wants to spend more time around his family. So this is a good thing for Will Muschamp. And Travaris Robinson is his protege. I mean, this is his Frankenstein. This is a guy that Will hired at Florida to coach DBs under him. This is a guy that Will brought to South Carolina. And so this is a guy who has learned under Will Muschamp, much like Glenn Schumann has learned under Kirby Smart. So I think this is a tremendous marriage. I think that bringing in a 42-year-old Travaris Robinson, who's an incredible recruiter, who's great working with young people, I think this works extremely well. And I think, I don't want to say upgrade, but I do think the staff is stronger, right? Because of that youth, because of that surge, simply because this is where Coach Muschamp is at. So to me, great hire. Robinson also all SEC safety at Auburn in 2002, played in the NFL. He's got one up Kirby there. Kirby didn't make it to the league. So to me, just a great hire. And it's Georgia 1, New Alabama nothing. And I got to say it's scoreboard, because earlier today, talking to some of my friends, Georgia friends, when we were discussing it, they were getting a little upset. They were getting a little chippy when I was saying, if Bama holds this guy, Kirby and Georgia will have egg on their face. This is a very important hire. Georgia cannot publicly lose to Kalen DeBoer. Kirby's already announced this guy as a position coach. And then all of a sudden he goes back to Alabama. All of a sudden people are looking at the scoreboard. 2 quarterback decommits in 2 months, and then you lose. And they were getting angry. I said, look, don't get mad at me. You know, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? This is Georgia against Alabama. And somebody's going to win for Travaris Robinson, and somebody's going to lose. And it's as simple as that. This is Kirby's first choice, and you're either going to win or lose with him. And for a while, people were a little nervous that Georgia was going to lose on this. And then the question would be, why would he go back to Bama and DeBoer, an unknown, versus coming to a Georgia program that's lost 2 games in 3 years, where his mentor has coached? So very interesting battle, the way it played out. Chris Lowe, Chris very close to agents, particularly Jimmy Sexton. He reported that Travaris Robinson is staying. And that's big. Huge win for Georgia football. Okay, make no mistake about it. Typically, when we talk about assistant coaches, we don't look at that as wins and losses, right? We say, oh, this guy wanted to go here. This was huge. This was out for everyone to see. And all the Alabama fans were saying, Alabama's playing chess, not checkers. And I'm thinking, man, I just can't imagine Kirby announcing this guy and losing him. Kirby's not usually wrong like that. But there was a lot of competition. Alabama realized that if they didn't keep this guy, they could lose more players. Caleb Downs is a guy a lot of people are talking about. And I don't know that he ends up at Georgia or anywhere else, but certainly losing his position coach, that's big. I mean, these kids sign up to play for these coaches, right? I mean, these Alabama players, they signed up to play for Nick Saban. And you know, Kalen DeBoer, watching his press conference, he seems like a really nice guy. All right. You know what his maxim is? Winners win because that's what winners do. Oh, boy. You know, after Nick Saban for 17 years and all this incredible philosophy about our self-standard for excellence that makes you go, wow, I never thought about it. Like, I listen to Nick Saban and I'm ready to do a better job, right? I'm ready to really just change my life for the better in every aspect. He's an incredible motivator. Nick Saban, as good as he is as a football coach, he's a tremendous philosophical leader. And I look at Kalen DeBoer and I go, you know, Boy Scout leader. Seems like a nice guy. Well, you know, he had that great record at Sioux Falls. Okay, 67-3 against who? I mean, other South Dakota and North Dakota schools? Have you ever watched a Sioux Falls game? Any of you? Can you tell me anything about Sioux Falls NAIA football? Did you ever hear of Sioux Falls NAIA football? Ever? Can you stream it anywhere? Is there anywhere you can listen to it on the radio? Maybe I don't know, what do they call that? The CB? Where can you get Sioux Falls? And I'm sorry to make light of it, but it's not relevant. It doesn't translate. Now, what he's done in the FBS ranks has been pretty impressive. I mean, 12-6 at Fresno, that's pretty good. You know, this run at Washington. But I ask, like, how much of that's him And how much of that is Michael Penix? How much of that is having a special quarterback? I mean, I know Michael didn't look good in the championship game because of all that pressure Michigan brought, but do I believe Jalen Milroe is as good as Michael Penix? Do I believe that Alabama can run all the motions and shifts and that they have a quarterback that can check down and make decisions like Michael Penix? I don't. But I think Jalen Milroe is very talented. But I don't even know that he's the quarterback of the future. I'm not even sure he's going to be the guy. Didn't the former Mississippi State guy go back in the portal? Is that fit Kalen DeBoer's offense? Can DeBoer wrap his offensive scheme around Jalen Milroe? And who's going to be left? Isaiah Bond, the guy that had like 3 or 4 catches on what proved to be the game-winning drive, and yes, the 4th down catch. The Buford kid, he's already gone. He's at Texas. He's checked out. You've lost your best assistant coach, which could lead to leading more players in the portal. And we're going to talk with Ryan Fowler from Tide 100.9 in a minute. Ryan is my go-to guy in Tuscaloosa. He's going to tell us what's going on at Alabama here in just a few minutes. We're going to want to hear who's in the portal and where their challenges are at. But as I sit here from 10,000 feet and I look at the Alabama program, I realize they're not the threat anymore. Texas is the threat. Texas is the threat. Make no mistake about it. Hey, you don't believe me? Go back and Google the Texas-Alabama game this year. Texas won by 10 points in Tuscaloosa. I don't want to hear Nick spin it. Listen, with all due respect to Coach Saban, this wasn't a great coaching job this year. It was a poor coaching job. They lost by 10 points at home the second game of the season. They weren't prepared. Jalen Milroe's not a freshman. He's not even a second-year player. He's a third-year player. They had the whole offseason to game plan with this guy. And they still had to bench him? Okay, sorry, that's not good. That's bad. That's a poor job being ready for the start of the year. Now they caught their second breath and the talent kicked in, and they ran into a Georgia team that went through 3 top 25 teams and an angry nest of Yellow Jackets on the road. That was tough. Georgia didn't look fast. Georgia looked tired. McConkey slow. Bowers off, right? Just 1 month later, it looked like a different Georgia team that romped over Florida State 63-3. And oh, by the way, who would have ever thought a coach could get a raise after a game like that? We will talk about that at the end of the program in the final segment. But looking at where Georgia stands right now, they passed Alabama, no question about that. Texas is going to be a challenge. Georgia's got work left to do in the portal. They've got work left to do at key positions. They're not where they need to be to win a national championship next year, I don't think. I don't think so. As much as Carson Beck coming back means, and as much as Trevor Etienne means, Dogs got work to do. But they're past Alabama. Texas is going to be the hurdle. That's going to be the tough game. We're going to talk about those different road games at the third segment of this program. I'm going to go right down the schedule, tell you who I think the toughest games are. One other note, I wrote this story today, and I guess I've kind of gone back through the clips over the last couple of years. I guess I've kind of become the unofficial Matt Stafford writer. And listen, I grew up largely in Michigan. Born in Mobile, Alabama, but grew up in Michigan, and I was never a Lions fan. I did cover the Lions in college for a little while. Understand the importance of that game. But if there's one guy you can't boo if you're the Detroit Lions, it's Matthew Stafford. This guy and his family have given millions to that community. They gave $1 million a year ago. Even they don't even live there anymore. You got to have some common sense, people. And I'm not saying that they needed to come to their feet and cheer for Matt Stafford, but booing is different. Okay, booing is negative and bad. And I don't care how much beer they drink or how much alcohol they consumed. That was ignorant and it was shameful. And if I was Kelly Stafford, I'd be really disappointed to know that Matthew and her and that family gave so much to that area, and that area needs it, folks. Let me tell you, that is an economically challenged area. And what the Staffords did was just tremendous charity. To be booed, I didn't like that. I wrote a story. Listen, Matthew handled it incredibly well. They should cheer for Jared Goff. He is their quarterback. I agree with Matthew. But if you're going to boo Stafford, then get your charitable donations from the Goff family moving forward, okay? Because that was disrespectful and unnecessary. And I don't care how much they wanted to win. That was shameful and unnecessary and a really bad look. because Matthew Stafford and his wife have done tremendous things that other people don't do. They're on a Peyton Manning level of giving. You just don't see it that often. So that was tough. And there's a poll out. I think about 72% of the people said they thought the booing was not good. And then I think there was 28% that said, well, it's a playoff game and whatever. To me, that's the difference between college football and the NFL. So those were a couple of the items that I was thinking about. Very interesting. Going to talk with Ryan Fowler in just a moment. Ask Ryan all sorts of questions about the Crimson Tide. I want to get to him right now. If you've got questions, ask them, and Kaylee Manziel will put those on the screen. If you have questions about Alabama for Ryan Fowler, I'll tell you what, I don't have any questions about Ingles because I know every time I go to Ingles what I'm going to get, and that's great service that I can rely on and depend on. And right now, I want to take this moment and recognize our sponsor, Ingles.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Well, welcome back, and I'm joined by Ryan Fowler. And Ryan, thanks for joining us, Ryan. 19 years covering Alabama at 100.9, Tide 100.9. Ryan, if I recall, didn't you go live for like 7 hours at some point this week on the radio?
I did. I'll be in some better light right here in just a couple seconds. But yes, I did. I went for – so the day that Nick Saban retired, that announcement came down, via Chris Loeb. I went for 6 hours that particular night, and we went off at 8 o'clock. And then when Kalen DeBoer got on the ground Friday night, we actually went for another 7 hours. So we went on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we came off the air at 9 o'clock. So we went 7 hours, and it was everything that you would think it would be. We were pretty hectic. We were pretty hectic for, a lot of the time. And we spent a lot of time, kind of digesting. I think the world was in shock. I mean, I got to be honest with you, Mike. I mean, you've been in the business a lot longer than I have. But it was one of those where we took – it was – you ever read a story and you're almost like, I want to see a confirmation of it? Like, because – there's so many of these fake accounts. I mean, I'm sure you probably got a fake Mike Griffith out there that wants to put up stuff. I see it. I know there's one that's called Evil Ryan Fowler that puts stuff out there from time to time. But I'm just making sure that it's real, right? I'm going, is this really Chris Lowe's account? Is this really Chris Lowe's account? So it was a pretty big topic of conversation. And, coaching searches are never fun from a media perspective. I mean, it is, trying to chase where Greg Byrne was at, and you're getting all type of information, but you're trying to decide what's true and what's false. Is this really real? Is this the target? And then all the coaches that want to use Alabama to get a raise, right? You got to follow those. And you're like, hold on, Mike Norvell turned it down. Well, Mike Norvell was never offered the job. He was never a candidate. But that's what they do in the world of coaching, and that's what we do on the media side of things.
Yeah, well, we learned from Kirby Smart, even if a player says he's in a portal, it doesn't mean he's in a portal. So it's kind of scary when things can be true but not true, and because things change so fast. Ryan, to your point, things are very fluid. And listen, I don't know where Kalen DeBoer was on the list. I guess, and I said this at the start of the program, I was a little disappointed, and maybe the dog and pony show isn't the way anymore, but I wanted to see Mike Locksley. I want to see some diversity. I wanted to see someone considered, and I wanted Dabo Sweeney for the old. I wanted these guys to at least have a conversation, but it just almost seemed like Byrne had this spreadsheet. And listen, DeBoer is a guy that's won. So let me back up a little bit. First of all, how surprised were you on a scale of 1 to 10 that Nick Saban retired after the season? 10 being most surprised, 1 being least.
10 out of 10. I can't think of anything any higher. Mike, there's so many people in our business that'll tell you, I knew that it was coming.
Right.
Well, I mean, I got to go back and take Nick Saban on his word. He said at 3:55, he told Reese Davis, he said at 3:55, I'm on the phone, the 4 o'clock meeting. He said, I did not know at that point whether I was going to retire, that he was still debating it. His daughter didn't even know that he was going to announce that he was retiring. I mean, she was on a flight to Orlando to go back to Disney World. And so if she didn't know, and Miss Terry, is sitting there debating on the phone, I can't tell you that I knew, but let me say this, 10 out of 10. But as I look back, there was things that the way that he coached, he almost coached with very little pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that. And I noticed relaxed, and he was not this uptight. So looking back, there was probably some signs, but I just thought it was him changing as a football coach. I thought it was him, looking at, the adjustment of college football. I know that many times people would say, they only have, it's all business over at Tuscaloosa. And I just thought he was adjusting to make it look like, hey, I'm having more fun. I'm having more fun. But at the end of the day, I look back and I reflect on that. And I'm thinking, you know what? There were some signs out there. I was in California. We went out on the 25th. And so we were out there, and I got no hints that, there's always scuttle, right? I mean, I've chased so many Nick Saban retiring stories. I lose track with every time I'm going to a radio show, they're like, is this Nick Saban's final year? And, I also understand that he's got to sell it to those recruits that he told that he was going to be there. He can't just come out here and say, guys, I've been thinking about it for 6 months. I knew in August that this was my final year because, he convinced a lot of recruits to come to campus, right? I mean, you look back at number 2 recruiting class behind Georgia. So he's got to be able to sell that. He's got to be able to tell you that he was not debating that. But I got to be honest. I didn't see it coming. It was a 10 out of 10. I was as shocked. I mean, literally, my mouth was wide open. I was just sitting there like in shock. I mean, I could send you the audio. You need to listen to it, Mike, because I was on with John McClain, the old Houston Chronicle veteran.
Yeah.
And so I had John on, and I stopped John, and I said, John, I've got some news here that I'm about to break into. And you could tell he was like freezing up. I was like, John, just hold on a minute. I want to make sure that I'm not looking at a fake Chris Lowe account. And then I hit him with the news, and he went, well, Ryan, you got plenty to talk about for the next couple of minutes. He goes, I'll let you go. And just as a true professional that John, for those who don't know John McClain, he's Houston Chronicle for 45 years. Now he does another website out there, but I mean, he is the veteran of all veterans. And he said, well, let me just say this, that Nick Saban is the greatest ever walked the sidelines. And Ryan, we'll talk again very, very soon. Looks like you've got bigger fish to fry. And I just kept repeating myself at the age of 72, Nick Saban retiring from college football. And,
Wow.
I hope we'll get into it, Mike. I often think about what forced Nick Saban to retire. It wasn't Kirby Smart. It wasn't, Lane Kiffin. It wasn't Sark out of Texas. When I look at the world of college football that we're living in now, it's chaos. It's chaos.
It is.
And as someone as programmed as Nick Saban, I had a coach on, Coach Pete Jenkins, on Wednesday night. I sent him a message, and he cried on the air. And he said, I hope we realize that we just took a coach that is not afraid of working, that works from the sun up to the sun down and even beyond. He said, we literally just forced him out of the game of college football. Wow. He said, when you think about the world of college football, and I know he's an old school coach, but he said, you think about the chaotic side. And really, if you think about, Kirby and Nick Saban, they may be differences on other topics, but they were actually pretty synced up with this topic. If you heard some of the things that Kirby said and some of the things that Nick said, if you substituted the voice, they were almost spot on with the identical side of this. This is college football, but it's just a different level of college football. And it's a mess.
Ryan. Now that Nick is gone, and it was a fascinating exit, and yet when I turned on the press conference, he's sitting right there in the front row, in the middle. And I'm thinking, and now as I speak to you, it's almost like, what if you did a radio show and Eli Gold was sitting there 3 feet from you? And listen, for those that don't know Eli Gold, I mean, obviously the voice of Alabama for years and years and years. And I hold Ryan in the highest regard. But my point is,
he's a legend.
He is a legend, but does it affect Kalen DeBoer? Like, to me, just Nick Saban just being there, he didn't mean, whether he meant to or not, he's Nick Saban. He upstages the guy. And DeBoer, as I said before you got on there, I know he's a good coach, Ryan, but he seems, I mean, who doesn't seem somewhat ordinary? He seems very ordinary. Is there some concern that you can't really fill Nick Saban's shoes when he's still in them right there in Tuscaloosa with an office in the stadium?
Well, and I'll say this. I wonder how much Nick Saban is going to be limited with what he's able to do. Like, I don't know if Nick Saban is going to be this guy that's going to be in the office, 3 days a week. I think it's more of a transition that he's going to help him in some areas. Maybe, it's kind of like Ozzie Newsome taught Nick Saban the fight song back in 2007 and taught him things about the tradition of Alabama. I think what it is Nick was an outsider to the University of Alabama, and Kalen DeBoer is an outsider, right? He doesn't know about the tradition. I think that's where Nick is going to be useful. We don't even really know his title. But let me say this, Mike, and not trying to disagree with you, but what if Nick Saban is not there? To me, that's probably a louder message if he's not there on Saturday. What if Nick Saban is like, so it almost looked like he was passing the torch. But I did watch Nick up front on the front row. That foot's just tapping 90-0. His arms are crossed. I mean, it's like the first time he's ever been in the room and he's not in charge.
Right.
I mean, that's a weird environment. So, but I just don't think, I talked to a couple of people who know Nick Saban, and they don't think that, he's a guy that, Miss Linda makes the coffee when he walks in and, she turns on the computer and all these different things. He's not going to have that. So it's like, from a fundraising standpoint, I think he'll probably be in that area, but I don't see him. I think about the stadium parking. Where he's going to park. Is he just going to come strolling across campus? Because from where the stadium parking lot is, there's really no parking spaces. So I just can't imagine Nick Saban just walking across campus to get to the office inside the stadium. I think it's going to be a very limited role, and that's just a guess. I don't really have any, sources. I don't think anybody does at this point, but I think it'll be a very limited role.
What does DeBoer have? I mean, didn't he have Will Rogers from State committed to him at Washington? Wasn't he going to be up there? And is there any chance he comes to? I mean, give me a look at a profile, and I know that Bond's already gone to the portal, but give me kind of a crib notes profile of what Alabama football looks like with the guys coming back that we know, position starters.
Well, I think offensively, let's start at the quarterback spot. Certainly you got Jalen Milroe, but he's going to have to take a significant step because when you think about him fitting in on what Kalen DeBoer is going to be able to bring on the offensive side of the football, I had Warren Moon on the show on Friday. Oh, wow. And I asked him, I said, I'd like for you to share some characteristics that you think he looks for in a quarterback. And I'm not saying that Jalen Milroe can't get there. That's not what I'm saying. But it's almost in your mind, you're sitting there going, okay, he's got this, but he doesn't have this. He's got this, but he doesn't have this. Jalen Milroe, if he is the starter in 226 days, I think it is, to Alabama's first game, he's going to have to really take a big step. And it may be, the change that we saw from August to Alabama beating Georgia in the SEC title game, that was a drastic change from Jalen Milroe, right? I mean, it was a significant growth from where, we're talking about a young man who was benched as a starter, and he really kind of flipped the script, right? Yeah. He's going to have to do that times two if he's really going to fit in with what Kalen DeBoer is going to do. He's going to ask a lot more. And I was talking to a quarterback coach out on the West Coast that knows Kalen, and he said, man, he's going to put so much on them. He said his quarterbacks have got to be able to do a lot of stuff, whether it's pre-reading, the timing routes. He said they're going to be very stressed. I
think we lost Ryan there for a second there. The Alabama quarterback situation is what we've been discussing. The direction of the Crimson Tide, very important. Ryan joins us now. And Ryan, You're telling us about Milroe. What about in the backfield? Look like some young talent. How many starters back on the line, and what's left in that receiving core?
Well, you get Tyler Booker back. When you think about, that for a couple of minutes, Tyler Booker is a big-time guard that's going to be there. Caden Proctor, we all know the freshman, All-American I say All-American. I think he was All-SEC guy,
He
freshman
was, yeah.
All-SEC. He was not a freshman All-American, but Caden Proctor struggled at times with pressure. Uh, I think you need to find a center. That's your big
Oh,
issue.
yeah,
Because
that was a big thing. Is that a
big
portal thing, or is that a portal thing maybe after spring? I'm kind of surprised they don't have one yet.
Yeah, I think so. I think you got to look at you got to look at a center. Um,
And in the
there.
backfield, isn't Justice Haynes back? Is he expected to come back, or is he a potential portal guy?
Yeah, no, I think Justice Haynes will be back because I think he'll be a featured back in Tuscaloosa. I think it's probably one of the reasons why you saw Roydell Williams go into the transfer portal.
That's
And I think
right.
you saw, Jace McClellan go there even prior to Nick Saban's retirement. So I think Justice Haynes will be a big part of it. I think Jamarian Miller is going to be a big part of it. Now, wide receiver, you're a little bit, I wouldn't say depleted, but you lost Mari Knobloch over the weekend. You lost Isaiah Bond, which caught the 31-yard,
Oh, yeah.
pass against Auburn. So you're a little bit, but like guys like Kobe Prentice is a guy that I would keep an eye on to really step up. But really, this wide receiver room has not been where it is needed to be. I
Oh,
mean,
no, not since 2020.
no,
And then defensively, I saw that T-Rob had you got two cornerbacks that are projected in the first round that are leaving. What's the front
Terran
seven
Arnold.
look like? Because the Bama front seven really did a good job stopping Georgia in short yardage. Are they losing guys, or are they going to be pretty thick and pretty full?
No, you're going to lose quite a bit of guys up there. You're going to get your linebackers back. Jahad Campbell, Deontay Lawson's going to come back, but you lose your two edge guys. Your guys with Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner, they're both gone. So you're going to be pretty thin right there. You may have to go out and get an edge guy because if you can't impact the quarterback, you got to be able to put pressure on the quarterback. So they do have Keon Keeley, which was a 5-star last year that's been in the system. He's still trying to gain some weight and try to get him ready to. He could be a guy that you could look at. Linebackers, you're going to be okay. Safety, as long as you can keep Caleb Downs, I think
That's the big one. What's the story with him? What are your thoughts? Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? What's the determining factor?
Well, I think it's all about who you're going to be able to name on the defensive coordinator side. And I've not really heard a definite name. I mean, I literally hung up the phone about a minute before I jumped on with you trying to find out anything I possibly could about, who's going to be the defensive coordinator at Alabama. Now, I've heard a lot about some possible options, and we could throw those around a little bit. Kane Womack's a guy at South Alabama that was a defensive coordinator at Indiana when Kalen DeBoer was there.
Could they? Let me ask you something. Jeremy Pruitt has a show cause that just means he can't recruit. Couldn't you bring him in as an analyst, though? I mean, this is a guy that won national championships, that understands Alabama, that recruits the South as well as anybody. I mean, he had 17 of those guys he recruited at Tennessee that were on their team that reached number one. He won national championship games. He's coached at Georgia. He knows all the offenses in the SEC. Why wouldn't Alabama just hire him as an analyst and say, okay, we'll take that 1-year deal where he's not there on game day just to have him there in the office and working with the guys all week?
Well, listen, you won't find a bigger fan of Jeremy Pruitt than I am. Him and I are from the same area. We're probably about 15, 20 minutes apart. When you look at Jeremy Pruitt, I think really, if you think about it, he took a lot of the bullet for Tennessee.
Oh, my, he took all the bullet. And that's
all of it.
Because if you look at the testimony, the only thing that they actually tied to him was a player's mom that said she got $3,000, and it was and we're looking at today's world, Ryan. It's almost like if we look at what was happening at Alabama,
it's a joke.
Look, it was happening everywhere. Let's just be honest. It just, a 5-year show, like you said. So to me, if I'm Alabama and I'm DeBoer, I'm Saban, I'm on the phone with Greg Sankey saying, okay, so a 5-year show cause means what? He can't recruit. Okay. So 1 year he can't be there on game day, but he can still be an analyst and be in the office all week. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Regardless of who you hire, why wouldn't you want him sitting in that room with all that institutional knowledge and that Rolodex of coaches? It just seems really simple to me.
Well, I listen, you won't find a bigger fan of Jeremy Pruitt, and this is probably not going to set well with Dogs. I think Jeremy Pruitt was a better coordinator than Kirby Smart.
Wow. You have thrown down the gauntlet, my friend. If this feed doesn't explode right now.
Hey, listen, I look at him because, over in Tuscaloosa, we called it third and Kirby, right? He would stop them on first and second down, and then third down, he would give them up. We used to call it third and Kirby. I mean, that's what it was because, and I understand Nick Saban was a big part of that defensive side of the football, but when Jeremy Pruitt came back to Tuscaloosa, the secondary problems were fixed. I mean, they were giving up a lot of mega plays there. So when you look at Jeremy Pruitt for a couple of minutes, listen, I look at it and I think about the NCAA, and I just laugh, when you look at all these different things about the NCAA. But, I'll say this, we really never have heard Jeremy Pruitt's side of the story, right? We've heard Tennessee's side of the story. You almost wonder if Greg Sankey would say, keep your mouth shut. We'll let you come back in the league.
Sure.
You go beat Alabama because, if I was a Tennessee fan, I'd probably be very nervous.
Well, think about this. I look at it like this. I look at the Hugh Freeze background and what he did, and he's a head coach at Auburn, and I compare that to Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee. It's so much fun, Ryan, to talk to you. Let me ask you, and I've made this declaration, and for people who don't know, I do Ryan's radio show often, and I dropped these.
You're great.
On him like he just dropped on us with the Jeremy Pruitt Kirby thing. So Ryan's enjoying this because it goes both ways. I'm always going on Tuscaloosa radio making all these comments. So this is good, but it's truth. It's truth serum, and it's two different lenses and two different perspectives. And Ryan's been there 19 years, and he's not a hater, folks. This is not a guy that just says stuff for a reaction. And Jeremy.
No, I love what Kirby means to Tuscaloosa.
But truthfully, I mean, I saw ESPN rank the all-time Alabama defenses, and Jeremy Pruitt's defense was ranked ahead of Kirby's by ESPN. Now, the proof's in the pudding. We'll see how it turns out. Let me ask you this. Who is the team to beat in the SEC next year? Give me your top three teams right now in the SEC in 2024.
Well, I think I start right there in Athens. I don't think
Georgia's number one in the SEC.
Oh, I don't think it's even close. I just think I think Georgia's out there by a country mile.
Oh wow!
When you think about, I want to see if Eli Drinkowitz is able to continue this at the Missouri Tigers. I know that when you look at this year. But if you're asking me right now, okay, when you look at Alabama, I'd probably put Alabama in there just simply because of talent, maybe at number 3. But I'd almost look at that second spot. Listen, I'm a guy that when I look at Lane Kiffin, I was a huge fan of Lane Kiffin.
You've got Ole Miss too?
I don't know if I'd have them at 2, but I mean, who else would we have at 2?
Texas?
Well, see, I've got to get that transition word in there, right? It's Texas. But I also look, Florida, no. South Carolina, no. Tennessee, no. Kentucky, no. Oklahoma, they've lost a ton out there.
I'm not sure about drinking the Drinkowitz, though. Drinkowitz Kool-Aid. I'm not drinking Drinkowitz Kool-Aid. That running back meant an awful lot to them.
He did. I think it's going to be a jumbled up mess, but I think Georgia's out there by a long shot. So now I'm trying to make it up with these Georgia fans. Maybe they won't make me have a miserable evening after what I said about Kirby. But
you're going to find your Twitter account, Ryan.
Yeah, at Ryan C. Fowler. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. But no, I mean, when I look at Georgia right now, I mean, you think about it until Kalen DeBoer proves that he can coach in this league. Why not Georgia? Think about how big that game will be when Georgia comes to Tuscaloosa. It's almost unfair to say, Kalen DeBoer, you got to win this game. You got to be able to beat Georgia to show us that you can really tough it out here. But in a lot of ways, look at that schedule from Alabama next year.
Yeah.
You got to go to Madison, Wisconsin. You got to go to Norman, Oklahoma. You got Georgia coming here. You got to go to Tennessee. You got the Missouri Tigers coming here. You got to go to Baton Rouge. I mean, guys, that schedule, maybe that's why Nick Saban retired. He looked at that schedule and he said, no, I ain't staying around here. Forget it. I'm not going.
2 or 3 losses. Travaris Robinson is a guy that kind of bounced back and forth. again, he developed 2 first-round corners. He'll be a co-defensive coordinator here. Lots of reports that he went back to Tuscaloosa, Bama, trying to keep this guy to be a coordinator. How big of a get is this for Georgia, in your opinion?
Absolutely big. Listen, I look at T-Rob as a defensive coordinator. I think the jury's still out. We're going to learn. But I look at I visited with him. I interviewed with him out in media day. We always you get 55 minutes and you try to make as much as you've covered a million of those media days. You get
Right.
55 minutes and you're trying to float. I waited about 7 minutes to interview T-Rob, and I walked away, and I can send you the audio. I was as impressed with him as any coach. I mean, it almost reminded me a lot of Burton Burns, just that
Mhm.
veteran leadership. But sitting there talking with him I was literally blown away just by the way that he said certain things, the way that he addressed. We talked a lot about Caleb Downs. We talked a lot about the secondary because Alabama's secondary was much better with him than it was with Pete Golding last year as defensive coordinator. And I think we're going to find out that T-Rob had a bigger role. I know Lane Kiffin likes to troll a lot, but I think T-Rob had a bigger role than maybe what we're letting on in Tuscaloosa. Something did not seem right. And remember when Lane Kiffin said, I think T-Rob is calling the plays. I don't think that's Kevin Steele. The more I get to thinking about that, I don't think that was Lane Kiffin trolling. I think he had truly heard something, in that coaching staff. So I think T-Rob's is a brilliant coach. I think he's a great recruiter. Um, you know, but think about when you've got a Kirby Smart as your head coach. If there's something that you need assistance with, you guys have got plenty. Plus, Glenn Schumann's there. Um, I mean, when you think about defensive side of the football, regardless if he needs help or not, I think he'll be just fine. And is Muschamp going to stay around?
Well, he's staying in an analyst role. I was talking about in the first segment. He's got a son going into Nashville, and there's some talk that that he's nearing retirement or semi-retirement. But again, that's why that analyst role is so fantastic. To me, I think Muschamp, that's actually what he came here for, if you remember. And then there was
I do. Yeah.
some issues, with Scott. So that's why I pitched the Pruitt thing, because I said this is the perfect role for a guy that loves Alabama football, by the way. And that to me is what's missing. And I guess my parting thoughts here, Ryan, from the outside in, it looks a lot like Brian Harsin. And I've said, now, what if Harsin would have beaten Alabama in 2021? What if Bryce Young doesn't have that miraculous 97-yard drive and the Tide wins? What if Auburn wins that game? Is it a different story for Brian Harsin, even though he didn't get along with Bobo and even though Derek Mason left? Was Auburn close with that? It was an out-of-the-box hire. Do you take any cautionary tale when we're comparing Brian Harsin, ultra successful coach at Boise State, versus another guy who's come from out west, and Kalen DeBoer?
I don't. I really don't. I think there's a lot of difference there. When I think about, look at Kirby Smart. Who could have predicted what he's been able to do at Georgia? Really, if you think about Kalen DeBoer coming to Alabama, he's probably got more credentials than what Kirby Smart when he left Alabama and went to Athens. So, think about what the wins, right? And so there's a risk, anything. Listen, unless you're going to go get Kirby or you're going to go get Sark. But even with those guys, there's a risk there when you think about. So there wasn't another Nick Saban that you could say, hey, let me go get Nick Saban's brother and he's going to just take over. But I think about, there's always a risk that, who's going to fit in. But I think I've covered a lot of press conferences. I did not cover Mike DeBose's introduction.
You missed it. I was there. You missed that. We just missed each other.
So, but I did cover the exit. I covered the exit side of things. I covered Fran being announced, Coach Fran. I covered Mike Price. Then I covered Mike Shula. I've covered Nick Saban, and now I covered Kalen DeBoer. And you always want to win the press conference. I thought he won it. I thought he knocked a home run out of the park. And even the one that was not in the media room where they took us to another Q&A, I'm sitting there going, man, he said a lot of the right stuff. And he showed respect for Coach Saban, but I think the part of believing in yourself to be able to say, I'm willing to follow Nick Saban. You realize how much confidence you got to have in your own ability to go, I'm not going to back down. That's why I always thought Lane Kiffin would have been the perfect candidate, because he would be willing to follow Nick Saban. And that was half the battle. The more I get to know Kalen DeBoer, the more I've talked to people out in Washington, he has confidence in his skill set. And hey, he did a lot with a lot less when you think about the talent level at Washington to put them in the national championship game, to be able to beat Texas the way they did. So in
They
one
did.
way, there's always a risk. We could be sitting here this time next year and it collapses. But when I look at Kalen DeBoer, there's a lot of reasons to be. It's almost like a re-energized here in Tuscaloosa. I'm not saying that Coach Saban was losing energy, but there just seems to be that cloud that was hanging over the program of like, when's he going to retire? When's he going to retire? When's he going to retire? Well, now that question is gone, right? You don't have to answer that question. So you look at Kalen DeBoer, if he is able to be successful at his age, you think, man, think about these battles that, if Alabama is able to maintain this standard, plus Les Miles rode the Nick Saban Foundation to a national title.
It's a good point. That's a good point. 49 years old, Kalen DeBoer, and boy, Ryan, you have spun this about as good and as happy as anybody that I've heard talk about this. This is why you're so good on radio, right? I love it.
Well, I have a lot of fun. So is the Georgia fans, are they mad at me? Is that what you're
Oh
hearing?
no, they love you, man.
I love them too.
They're digging deeper. They're going to go back and watch film to see just, maybe this guy's right. Maybe Jeremy I'm sure they're just so happy right now. Listen, if Kalen DeBoer can teach Jalen Milroe not to cross the line of scrimmage when he throws the football, he could be. And the thing of it was, I was at that Auburn game. And Milroe at times looked so good in that game, and at other times made you pull your hair out if you're an Alabama person. But against Georgia, he was near flawless. He was poised. He was cool. He was the 30-yard run, the fourth down pass, the conversions, no mistakes, no fumbles. He was better than Carson Beck in that game. Not overall, but in that particular instance, he played really well. Then the Michigan pressure came, and the Milroe miracle turned into the Milroe meltdown, and Alabama was out. I really think they would have won the national title if they'd won.
So just to add this to it, okay? Because I'm gonna say something. This is probably going to really irritate the Georgia fans.
Oh no!
But if I looked at Alabama, this was not a very good football team.
I agree.
I don't know how they beat Georgia. I honestly do not know, because when I look back at that game, this Alabama team reminded me nothing of really Alabama. Like, think about all the crap they said with this lank, let all the naysayers know. You got Jalen Milroe calling out Bill O'Brien out in California. They just didn't sound like an Alabama team. And I know that sounds crazy.
Maybe that's why, it's interesting. I was talking with Steve Spurrier the other night about this Nick Saban retirement. And I can't keep Ryan here all night, folks, so I'll just finish up here. And I asked him, when you're a legend, how do you know when it's time to go? And Coach Spurrier, who in the middle of the season left because he wanted his assistants to have a chance to keep their jobs, but also because he said he couldn't connect to the team. He just didn't have that connection with the team that he'd always had. Interestingly enough, I talked to Jeremy Pruitt a few nights later, and, he goes, we beat him pretty good at Georgia. He goes, you need to let coach know. And I don't know if it's going to make him feel any better or not. He said, but we knew every single play, whether they were running or passing, because their left tackle was tipping it off. And we were run blitzing on runs, and we were dropping on passes. We knew every single play, run or pass. He said, make sure Coach Spurrier, and I still haven't told him that. I don't know if that's going to make the ball coach feel any better, just be honest with you, just knowing how he is, but I wonder if Nick Saban, to your point, you said he tried to be a little bit cooler and a little bit nicer, and if part of him just said, I can't do this. This just is not me. I just can't be this happy birthday cake guy and calm. That's just not Nick. Like you said, it just didn't look like the Nick Saban. He wasn't able to coach like we've always seen him coach. And I wonder if maybe the Tide, to your point, lost a little bit of an edge, right? And as for Georgia, it was we've talked about it here on a program and on our programming. It was a tired Georgia team. The November stretch, 3 top 25 teams in a row, and a nest full of angry Yellow Jackets on the road. That was a tough lead in. They looked tired, and Bowers didn't have his breakaway, and McConkey didn't have fifth gear, and Beck didn't have anyone to throw to because of that Alabama secondary being so good. And the Tide did a better job up front where Mike Bobo could get him in 3rd and 2 but couldn't execute. And then the turnovers, missed field goal, an underthrown ball by Beck to a wide open Arian Smith. It's 3 points instead of 7. The little things added up, and Bama played a clean game, and ultimately that's good coaching. They won the turnover battle. They won special teams. Their quarterback didn't make the mistakes. And that just goes to show you sometimes the best team doesn't win. And yet still it was an Alabama team that made the college football playoff. Ryan, I'm going to let you get back at it. I know you probably won over a lot of new fans tonight on Twitter. Don't be too hard on Ryan, folks. He's one of the nicest guys in the business. He's very good at what he does. We will bring him back for more. The human pinata tonight, though. But Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on the program. And anytime I can come on your show in Tuscaloosa, more than happy to be back on the air at 100.9 in Taiwan.
Well, I love to pick your brain, and it's freezing cold here. We're going to go down to like 17 degrees tonight, so maybe my takes were even colder than the outside air. Yeah, maybe that was part. We're actually expecting freezing rain, so it's not a Chamber of Commerce type week. We Kalen DeBoer comes out of the Pacific Northwest, and we're promising him like warmer weather, and we're going to have like freezing rain tonight. We're expected to have
maybe Kalen DeBoer brought that weather with him. Ryan Fowler, Tide 100.9, my good friend. Always enjoy visiting with you. Coming up next, it's the Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment. It's brought to you by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. This is the On the Beat Show. I'm Mike Griffith on DawgNation.
Want to make sure your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new Trane HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to carry.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
Welcome back to the program. Mike Griffith here. The segment went much longer with Ryan than I'd planned, but I do enjoy visiting with him, folks. He is a wonderful guy. You can tell he's got a tremendous disposition. I know that a lot of people disagreeing with Ryan on his take there, but you know what? That's the lens from Tuscaloosa. Everybody has a different perspective, and of course, people in Tuscaloosa, there's probably a little bit of jealousy right now with Kirby Smart going into his 9th season. I mean, I just can't imagine a coach with a better foundation than what Kirby has. And as I said at the start of the show, Travaris Robinson, this is an incredible hire. This isn't a good hire. This is an incredible hire. And this is a guy that Kirby's been after before. This is a guy that was an all-SEC safety at Auburn, had played in the league for 2 years. That's a lot of credibility with these players. This is a guy that developed 2 cornerbacks at Alabama this year, both projected in the first round. That's something that hadn't even happened at Georgia. Think about that. This is a guy that was the defensive coordinator under Will Muschamp the last time Georgia lost a home game. T-Rob was over there calling the D. So this is a proven coach, 42 years old, absolute peak of his career. And he had to make a decision to be the Alabama guy and be the only coordinator on $2 million a year, or to come to Georgia and split those duties, learn a little bit more. What's a better launch point? Where does he got a better chance of being hired? Now, remember, this is a guy that knows the Alabama personnel. So it's a bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush. And he said, you know what? I'm sure Coach Muschamp, who was his mentor, I'm sure Will said, hey, look, this is going to be a great deal for you. Glenn Schumann's going to be a head coach in the next 2 or 3 years. You're going to be the guy. And you may even be a head coach yourself in the next 2 or 3 years. So I think this is a huge, huge hire. So we talked about hot and cold takes. I'm going to get to a super hot Georgia schedule next year, but this is the coldest take. It was cold for Florida State to give Mike Norvell almost a $3 million raise. Folks, he just lost 63-3. Has there ever in the history of the world been somebody that got a $3 million raise after losing a game or having a performance on par with 63 to 3. 3 million of 7.3. Let me do the math. Is that almost 40%? You get a 40% raise? I know there's some mathematicians out there with calculators. Get to it. Do the math for me. Divide 3 by 7.3 and tell me what you get. Maybe 30-some percent. A $3 million raise after you lose 63 to 3? And oh, by the way, you just had a recruiting sanction? You just got caught cheating in recruiting, trying to pay Amarius Mims or get an NIL deal set up with him before he'd sign with you. So let's go right down the list here. You had 9 of your guys quit on the team. Well, that's some real team chemistry there, Coach. You just had a major NCAA violation. It should have been a level 1. You got away with a level 2, but it was a level 1 because the university knew it was committing. Your offensive coordinator suspended like 3 games. That's not good. And you lost 63 to 3, the worst loss in school history and in bowl history. But we're going to give you a $3 million raise because somebody said you might go to Alabama. Like Ryan said, didn't get the offer. He was never going to get that offer. This is incredibly cold. I mean, this is just cold. Florida State, you're desperate. And I know I've upset some Florida State people saying that I didn't want to hear the pity party, saying I didn't want the victimhood. I didn't want to hear any of that going into the bowl game. But you know what it did do? Is it made me appreciate Georgia and Kirby Smart culture that much more. I was talking with Kendall Milton's dad today, Chris Milton, and we were talking about Kendall after the SEC championship game. And this is where it all started. I went over to Kendall Milton minutes after the SEC championship game. He literally still has his uniform on. And I said to Kendall, are you going to play in the bowl game? We didn't know where they were going. We didn't know what was going to happen. I said, if they don't make the playoff, are you going to play in the bowl game? And Kendall said, I am not going to abandon my brothers. He said, I have been through so much with these guys. I will absolutely play every chance I get with them. And then I went over to Cedric Van Pran. And Van Pran heard what Milt said and said, that's the plan. We'll think, we're going to do some talking about it. And then I went to Tyke Smith. And Tyke said, yeah, I'm going to. And the Georgia players started talking. And they opted in. They decided, you know what? This team did not win a 3rd national title in a row. The win streak did just stop. But they were going to go out together. Amarius Mims was at the game. Injured, wasn't able to play. Brock Bowers is at the game. Injured, wasn't able to play. Georgia went out as a team. And I think that was such a great story. And I know it didn't get covered. I know a lot of the national media didn't talk about that because it wasn't a playoff game. But to me, that was one of the best endings of a season. And I got to tell you, Kirby, his teams they really end well. I think about this ending. Obviously, the 2 national championships were incredible. But think about the Peach Bowl. You had guys missing practice with COVID. James Cook wasn't there because of the passing of his father. Kenny McIntosh had to step up. JT had to bring him down from 10 or 11 points behind. Podlesny had to kick a 54-yarder. That was an undefeated Cincinnati team, by the way, right? They knocked them off. That was a great – the year before against Baylor, what an incredibly tough year that was. All the injuries all year long. And Jake throws for like 159 or 157 yards to Pickens in the first half. They weren't supposed to beat Baylor. That was Baylor's best team ever. That was a remarkable finish to the season. So 20 straight wins for Kirby now when he has more than a week to prepare. And yes, they do have a bye week before the Alabama game. That brings me to the hot segment. When I look at next year's schedule, you heard what Ryan Fowler said. Ryan said he thought that Georgia's on top, and it's not even close. He thinks Georgia is much higher than everyone else. I don't know that I'm as convinced of that. I think there's work to be done because in the words of Kirby Smart, they're not practicing to beat one team. They're practicing to beat everybody. And that is going to be a really, really difficult schedule for the Dogs. And now there's a 12-team playoff. If you don't win the league, you have to win 4 postseason. Think about that. 4 postseason games. You got the SEC title game, and then you've got, let's just say Georgia doesn't win the SEC championship, just for the sake of argument. You've got the 5-12 game, the 6-11, the 7-10, the 8-9. Then you got the second round, where one plays the highest seed and two, and then you got another round. It's so much. It is such a journey that it's really a tournament sport now. And there's no way to know who's going to be good. Like just this year, the Georgia that we saw play Alabama, that wasn't Georgia's best. They were tired, okay? And the schedule caught up with them. They didn't catch a break. As it turned out, the schedule wasn't good. Having to play top 10 Missouri, having to play a top 12 Ole Miss, having to play a top 25 Tennessee on the road, having to play that Georgia Tech team. All those teams won their bowl games. All those teams were on the rise, and Georgia was just tired. They were just tired. I said they expired. 29 wins in a row caught up. 29. SEC record. Never been done. History. Think about that. So they were tired. They got work left to do. Toughest game next year, I believe, at Texas. I think at Texas is the toughest game of the 2024 season. I think Texas is the most likely team to beat Georgia in 2024 because of their pass game. Isaiah Bond's there. Ewers is there. I saw what they did against Alabama and Tuscaloosa. Most all of their offensive line is back. Can Georgia outscore them on the road? That's going to be a really tough game. I think the second toughest game is at Alabama. I do agree that there's still a lot of talent there. There's going to be a lot of confidence. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the Tide. I believe that's their SEC opener. Georgia will have already played Kentucky. That's going to be a physical game. At Alabama second. Third toughest at Ole Miss. It's a little bit of a snake pit there, a smaller stadium. Been a minute since Georgia's been there. Kirby lost there last time. You remember Hugh Freeze was the head coach back in 2016, and it wasn't that close. Ole Miss has done really well through the portal. It will be in November, so depth could be a factor for the Rebels. Kirby's teams have a tendency to get better. I think at Kentucky is the fourth toughest. These are 4 road games. Brock Vandagriff's there, and guess what? He knows your offense, and he knows your defense. And I think Brock Vandagriff is a whale of a quarterback. I think Kentucky is going to be sneaky good next year. I think playing in Lexington in September, it's early in the year. Kentucky will be fresh. There won't be a lot of attrition yet. Typically, they're not as deep as other teams, and when you get them later, they're missing people. You're getting them early. That could be a tough game. Fifth toughest game, Clemson. This ain't your old Clemson. This is not the Clemson of 2021 that had the number 2 defense in the nation. This is a different Clemson. They're not as talented. They're still good. It is a neutral site game. It is the opener. Next toughest game, home game with Tennessee. I expect Josh Heupel and Tennessee to be very good next year. Maybe not as good as 2 years ago, but better than last season. And the next toughest game, Auburn and Hugh Freeze. What is it about Hugh Freeze? He's like that left-hander out of the bullpen that throws a screwball. He just coaches the game really well against Kirby. He's a guy that's very creative with his offense. The Tigers had more than 200 yards rushing against Georgia last season. That game went deep into the fourth quarter, and you needed Brock Bowers. There's no Brock Bowers. There's no Captain America next season. We're still waiting to find out who's going to be the go-to guy. No Lad McConkey, explosive element, missing the explosive element, missing the go-to third down receiver. Georgia coaches have to get that for Carson Beck to be at his best, and I believe to win a national championship. That's how I'm going to close. I'm going to keep an eye on the portal. I'm going to keep looking for Georgia to get another dynamic receiver, whether it's now, whether it's after the spring. Maybe somebody emerges from within the team. Maybe Dylan Bell takes the next step, or Anthony Ebb. I love it. Somebody's got to take the next step, because right now I'm looking real hard for Georgia to find a go-to receiver. ETN is huge, but I think Georgia's still one receiver shy of what they need to win a national championship in 2024. But the Dogs are going to be in the playoff. They're going to be barking. They're going to beat Alabama. They beat Alabama for Travaris Robinson. Kirby 1, DeBoer 0. Thanks for joining me tonight, Kaylee Manziel. Tremendous production. Don't forget, every day, 10 a.m., it's Brandon Adams and DawgNation Daily. And then on Wednesday nights, Jeff Sentell comes at you before the hedges. Thursday night, Kaylee Manziel, Connor Riley doing a little programming for you on Thursday night. I want everybody to have a wonderful week. Try not to be too hard on Ryan Fowler. I'll be back next week here on the On the Beat Show.